Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversation at Home. I'm Jim Halterman from TV Guide Magazine. Before we get started with this conversation, I wanted to let you know that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation has a COVID-19 relief fund to support SAG-AFTRA performers who are in urgent need as this pandemic continues. Since March of 2020, the foundation has given over $6.1 million in aid to 6,500 performers and families facing extreme hardship. If you are a SAG-AFTRA member and you need help, please ask. And if you are able to help support our community and this crucial effort, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Kate Mara from A Teacher, which just wrapped its 10 episodes last month on Hulu. How are you, Kate?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you about the show. I watched all 10 episodes and was really drawn in. But before we dive into that, I also like to always talk about careers because the actors watching this kind of want to know your early start and things like that. So I want to know, when did acting come into your life? I think it might have been fairly early, but was it kind of that thing where you knew really early on that this is what I'm meant to do?
Yeah, I feel like I still feel very lucky to have known, from the time I was a really, really young girl that I wanted to be an actor. I grew up in Bedford, New York, which is, probably about an hour from New York City. And my mom used to take me and my sister to see Broadway shows all the time. We were brought up on, old movie musicals and, just a lot of old film in our house. And so it was just always a huge passion of mine, specifically Broadway musicals. Yeah. And so when I was very young, probably about 9, I think, was when I discovered that apparently you could be an actor as a grown-up job. So once I learned that, I sort of never looked back. That was my goal. And, I was very lucky that I lived close enough to New York City that eventually when I turned 14 was when I really started working professionally. And, I had my mom was a huge support. She was the one that had to drive me into the city after school and bring me to the auditions and all of that stuff. But yeah, I was very young when I started.
Were you a good auditioner? I feel like some people either have no problem with auditions or others are like nervous wrecks. Where did you fall on this scale?
I think when I was very young, when I first started out, I think I was better then. And then I went through sort of maybe I'm still in the rough patch. I think the more you audition, the easier it sort of feels or something, the more you get used to it. And now, because I'm at a certain point in my career, even though I do still audition occasionally, because I don't do it as often, I do get way more nervous now because, it's not something that I'm sort of, I haven't practiced doing that in a while. So it feels like almost more pressure now than it did then.
Yeah. And I peeked at your early credits and the first one was Law and Order, which I feel like is like, if you live in New York, you have to be on Law and Order, one of those shows. What was that role and what do you remember about that first experience in front of the camera?
Well, I did a few of the Law and Orders because, there's a few different versions of it. I did, the regular Law and Order. I played the crime. I don't know. I don't even know if I had a name, but I was just the crying, grieving daughter of someone who died. But Benjamin Bratt was the star, and he was there interviewing me in the house. I remember it very, very well. And what I remember is that they were so kind to me and my mom. It was a really nice first experience. Because really, I don't know. I think that was considered, a day player or whatever, and it felt very special and really exciting. We were shooting in New York City, which now feels like it just feels so rare to be able to shoot in New York City. I haven't done that very often in my career.
Yeah.
But then I went on to do Law and Order Special Victims Unit and. There's so many Law and Order shows that I think if you're an actor in New York, you gotta appear on at least one of them.
Yeah, it's like a badge of honor.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at everything you've done, which you've done a little of everything, but you've done a lot of film, a lot of television. Was there ever a point in your career you thought you had to choose one or the other? It seems like you haven't had the problem going back and forth, but starting out, did you think you had to go a certain path, or did you just go role to role?
Yeah, I think there was definitely occasionally there when I was younger, there was that question of, well, do you want to do theater or do you want to do film and TV? And I was so enamored with, because I was brought up going to Broadway shows, and that was really my first dream. So at the beginning, that's all I cared about. Yeah. Really, it was like the auditioning for television and occasionally movies. It was just sort of like, okay, well, I guess I'll do that too. But Broadway was what I wanted more than anything. And then when I started working more, getting little jobs on TV and in independent movies, I realized that it didn't matter where I was acting. That's what I loved. And so, and then it became more of a question of, from my agents at the time, do you want to do TV or movies? Because if you want to do TV, you really need to get to LA. And I was and still am, but really I was so in love with New York, and my entire family was in New York. And as much as I wanted to be an actor, my parents were like, we have 3 other kids. We're not moving to LA. And I also had no desire to move to LA. So that was put on hold. Moving to LA was just sort of put on hold until I was old enough to go by myself and do it then.
Okay, that's great. So now fast forward a couple of years, and now we're to a teacher. And I know about the movie that came out, which I did not see, and I thought about watching it before I jumped into the series, but then I decided not to because I really wanted to see the series for what it was. But what was your experience first hearing about the TV project? I don't know if you were familiar with the film. Can you talk about your entry into it?
Yeah, I was familiar with Hannah Feidel's movie. I had seen it when it came out a few years ago, and I was just sort of fascinated, as I still am, very fascinated with the subject matter. I thought she did a great job with the film. She reached out to me. She and Michael Costigan, our producing partner, reached out to me, and had the idea of me starring in it and also producing it alongside them. I had just produced my first independent movie that I produced with my friend Elliot Page. And so I had never, been involved in producing on the television side of things. So I was really excited at the idea of it, but, there wasn't any, it was obviously really early days. So Hannah sort of pitched her idea to me, and I knew that I was in because I'd already seen her work. I knew that the role was going to be very challenging and something that I really had to play. And, then the rest took us a few years to get where we are today. But, it was all worth it. It was a lot of work and excitement leading up to now.
Well, as a producer and knowing you were going to be acting in it as well, what were some of the things that you and Hannah talked about as far as whether the character choices or just things we see or don't see in the show?
There was so much discussion about everything, which is why I really do love being on the other side of the camera as well. While there's still so much that I need to learn as a producer, the creative aspect of it is what I really loved. The casting specifically was so exciting to me. And, Hannah's very collaborative. She was very collaborative with me with all of that stuff. And luckily we have very similar taste. I can't remember a time that we disagreed about an actor that we wanted, or it wasn't just the acting, it was also even music choices. She would send me ideas and things, and being involved in that as well, it's just different. It's not something that I was ever involved in. And the biggest, I think, shift from being an actor to producer was that I'd come home from work all day, And after I put my daughter to sleep, I would watch dailies from, the day or the day before. That was never something that I did ever in my acting career. And it was something I did every single day on this show, which was really a great learning experience for me.
Yeah. Are you somebody that does like to watch yourself on camera?
Oh, I'm someone who likes to see. I've seen everything that I've done, mostly because even if it's terrible, I need to know how bad it is because I know other people are seeing it. So it's like,
Yeah.
I feel like even the bad stuff you end up doing is gonna somehow teach you and make you a better actor. So
Yeah.
I do see it all. But I think that, when you're watching dailies, not just because I wasn't just watching my scenes, I was watching everybody's scenes. Sure. It kind of numbs you to, seeing yourself. I think it's a good thing. It makes you much less sort of obsessed with what you're only doing, and it makes you sort of see the bigger picture,
Yeah. And what is kind of your preparation really for any role, but particularly this one? Like, what do you need to do for yourself before that first day of shooting?
Well, we were lucky on this. We had, even though we only had a very short amount of time to shoot the series, we had, I think it was about 2 weeks, maybe a little more, of just rehearsing and prepping, which I know that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when it's just rehearsing for 2 weeks straight, it really does feel like a luxury when on a lot of projects you don't have 2 days. So, So we had a lot of time to just sit in a room with our director and the other actors and talk about, the journey that the characters are going to go on and each episode specifically. So that was really the best preparation, just being able to talk. It wasn't even really reading the scenes, Hannah's very, she's very interested in, it's realism, and she likes improv and all of those things. And she likes to find things on set really organically. So a lot of it wasn't even reading the scenes. It was just talking about them.
Oh, that's cool. And the whole show kind of rests on yours and Nick Robinson's shoulders because it's all about that relationship. What was your work like with Nick before you guys started shooting and just getting to know each other, or just either knowing your characters together?
Yeah, we just had those couple weeks where me and Nick and Hannah would really just sit down and focus on each episode individually and where our characters are at that point in time. And, sort of just a lot of conversations about it, tweaking, different dialogue things. And, but, even that, you don't always have that luxury of being able to just sit and talk about your characters and talk about why they're doing the things that they're doing at that moment in time. But for this, it was really important because we didn't have a lot of time when we actually got to set. We really did need that time before, so that when we got to set, we could just focus on, getting the scenes and moving rather quickly.
Yeah, it's funny, when I was watching the episodes, I realized I was watching it more carefully than I would something else because I wanted to see the choices that the characters were making and who is at fault, and it wasn't black and white in the show, which I really liked. You saw different characters make different decisions. But my question is, how much do you think about the audience reaction? What the audience is going to perceive. I know some actors try not to get that in their head. Others do think about it. Where are you there?
I think for something like this, we definitely knew going into it that people were going to have probably conflicting feelings about my character specifically.
Yeah.
She obviously is morally, she makes some morally, she she's a confused character, and we wanted to make sure that she didn't just come off as this villain. So there was a lot of thought and care, I think, when it came to making sure Claire was layered, and hoping that, like you said, that it wasn't just black and white, that there was conversation happening, you know, for audiences when watching each episode, and the hope is that they, you know, see her as a human, and not obviously not agreeing with her very bad choices, but seeing her as a layered human being who, and maybe even connecting with some of her characteristics before, you know, they fall into this relationship. You know, that was important, I think, before she and Eric have this very illegal, immoral relationship. We wanted to make her as relatable as possible, and I do think that in a lot of ways she is.
Yeah, there are two things that stood out to me. Is one, that she's not looking for this. It kind of just events kind of take her, you know, down this path. But also there's a scene in the first episode, which I rewatched this morning after having seen the whole series. And when she shoplifts in the grocery store and just steals a little lipstick that, you know, she could probably easily pay for, I thought that was an interesting thing about her character. And I was curious, what's your thinking about those choices, even something as simple as shoplifting? What does that say about who she is?
Yeah, I mean, we thought that was an important scene, that the scene of her shoplifting, but then also, for me, even more importantly, the scene soon after when she attempts to tell her husband about the shoplifting, and he, you know, kind of shuts her down. You know, he laughs at it and is like, what the hell were you doing? And then she closes off. You know, I think that potentially if that sort of conversation had gone differently, maybe other things would also have gone differently. Yeah. So I did think that small moment between the two of them was a really, really huge sort of turning point in her life.
Yeah. At that point, at least at the first part of this series, of the season, do you think she's aware? Like, is she self-aware enough to kind of know what she's doing? Or do you feel like she just gets caught up in this, I don't know if it's a fantasy or just some excitement in her life? How did you see her at the start of all this?
I think that she is definitely aware of some things, but I think she tells herself so many lies to justify her behavior after the fact. You know, she's a smart person, so I don't think that's ever in question. But yeah, I mean, I think there are so many moments that, because someone had asked us recently, me and Nick, you know, what was the sort of turning point for them or for her in the show, and we had very different answers, which I thought was interesting. But it's an interesting question. You know, it's interesting to hear audience members say what they thought was the first sort of immoral moment or immoral choice that she makes. Because people do have different opinions on that, which I think is interesting. So yeah, I do think that she tells herself, or she convinces herself of these lies, and I think she's in denial for a lot of this.
Yeah. I didn't know going into the series, because I wasn't reporting on it or anything. I was just watching it as a viewer. I didn't know we were going to see life beyond the scandal. I thought maybe it was just going to be about this. And then the last few episodes I found so informative for me. How important was that for you? And was that a talking point, or was that Hannah's vision all along? Because I believe the movie ends with the scandal kind of erupting, right? Like, it doesn't the movie at that point?
It does. Hannah has a good story, and I don't know all of the details, but she told it recently. I guess Michael Costigan, our producing partner, saw her movie at Sundance, and came up to her after and said, "What happens next?" And that's where this series sort of was born, I would say. So yeah, that was always the plan, was that we didn't want it to just be about the actual scandal or relationship. We wanted it to also really focus on the aftermath and how it affects not just Claire, but everyone else. You know, obviously really specifically Eric. So yeah, for me, that was just so exciting because then I'm not just playing her in, this one specific moment in her life. I'm also playing her after she, is found out and has to live with herself. And then of course the huge time jump at the end as well, which was another, I feel like, gift for us as actors to be able to play our characters 10 years later.
But once she gets out of, being in jail, and physically she looks different, and the way you portray her then, it really jumped out at me. And I was curious, when you were getting to those episodes, was your approach differently, kind of just knowing what was behind her as far as her life? And you look smaller. You physically
Right.
just look smaller. But talk about that a little bit as far as your acting choices.
Yeah, well, it is two very different versions of the same character. In the second half of the season, I'm playing someone who has so much shame and so much guilt, and really she just wants to disappear in a lot of those episodes. So physically speaking, that was a choice, to physically feel like you want to make yourself smaller because you're trying to hide from this horrendous decision that you made. So yeah, that was definitely a decision that was made between Hannah and I. And yeah, whereas the first, it was interesting to do the first, I think it's 6 episodes or 5 episodes, which are kind of, for Claire, much more joyous. And, she's sort of falling in love, or what, she thinks she's falling in love, or she's telling herself she is. And then, to play such a different person is, it was a mind, I was about to swear, I'm not going to, but it was interesting to make that shift. I was like, oh, this is so sad now. Now I have to have a very different experience on the show.
Yeah, and in those episodes, we also find out more about her upbringing and her relationship with her father. I thought was very important to the character, especially when everybody else in her life is pretty much, shut her out, or at least giving her a hard time. Like her brother is trying to help her, but there's also a lot of feelings and resentment in that household. But can you talk about the father relationship and how that ends up helping her in a way?
Yeah, the father relationship was something obviously really important to Claire's story, to her backstory specifically. So it was something I always had in my mind. Knowing how she grew up and what her life was like that led her to certain life choices was very important. And, I liked the idea of someone like her dad, who for a lot of the show, she really despises and has a lot of hatred towards, obviously all coming from pain, from hurt. But I liked the idea that he has turned his life around, and that she eventually, shows up on his doorstep asking for help. And, it's kind of him and his love and support that helps her turn her life around as well. I thought that was a, powerful choice from Hannah.
Yeah, I loved it. Okay, so let's talk about that last scene with you and Nick, which take place 10 years later. And I don't know when you shot that in the course of shooting, if that was the last scene or towards the end. Can you talk about just shooting that? Because it's a heavy scene. I watched it like 3 times just because I was so interested in both the perspectives. But can you talk about shooting that scene?
Yeah, we were shooting 2 or 3 episodes at a time. I think it was 2 episodes. So we were shooting like the last 2 episodes sort of together, sort of like a movie. And so, but yeah, that one scene was shot. We had a whole day to just shoot that one scene. And it was very surreal, because our characters had only really interacted together in one very specific way. And then all of a sudden to, have to be having this conversation with each other in a very different light. And, it was a very odd, uncomfortable scene to shoot all day. And we did keep looking at each other going like, do you feel weird or uncomfortable or sad? All of those things. But I think that you're meant to. So it makes sense.
Yeah, it's definitely not what I would call a happy ending, but it was, to me, very fitting. But was there discussion about how the show should end, if it should end on some kind of upswing, or if it was okay to end it where it did?
Yeah, well, I think Hannah's decision to end it on Eric finding his voice and being the one to have the last say and to really for it to be on his terms. I think it's very powerful for a survivor of something like this to be able to sit across from the person that harmed them and be able to say the things that you've been feeling, because a lot of people don't ever get that opportunity. So I know that it was a very specific choice that she made, and she wanted him to have that moment. To me, it is for him a very hopeful ending to the show. For Claire, not so much, but for him, I do think it is quite. There is some happiness there, I think.
Yeah, and once the show did start airing, were you surprised at the reaction or the questions you were getting, either from press or just, I don't know how much you're on social media and that, but what were they kind of what you thought you would be getting, or did anything surprise you there?
Yes and no. We knew that people would be sort of like torn between like, people loving the show and then people going like, I can never watch something about that subject matter, and people loving these characters together, which obviously feels so wrong to feel that way and to say that, and then other people, not feeling that way. So we expected some of that, but it is interesting to actually see it happening and, see people writing about it and all of that. So yeah, that it has been fascinating to see people's reactions to the show.
Yeah, and going off some of the things that you were just saying about that last scene and just in general with the show, are you an actor that can kind of shake things off once you leave set and go home, or do things really sit with you? Where do you fall there?
Usually I can usually shake it off pretty easily. I think the times that I don't feel like I can shake it off is if I feel like I didn't do something, or I didn't say something, or, if I have regret about maybe not going for it or something, if there's ever that, right, then that is very difficult. But I think just specifically for this show, I had a newborn. So, I had to compartmentalize things or I wouldn't be able to act and I wouldn't be able to take care of my daughter. So it was, for this, it was actually, I just kind of figured out how to leave it all behind.
Yeah. Yeah. I always ask this question. It's usually to actors later in their life, because I feel like you're young. You still have a lot of career ahead of you. What's on your
God, I hope so.
I think you do. I think you're okay. What's on your bucket list? Because you've done already so much. When I looked at your credits, I saw a lot of drama, but also some lighter things. But what would you like to see yourself be doing as an actor and a producer also?
I would love to at some point do, and this isn't, well, it was one of my dreams as a kid to do more, or to do a sort of, some more voiceover stuff. I was obsessed with, as a kid, I think most kids are obsessed with Disney movies. And, so I would love to be the voice of some kind of great, animated movie that my kids can watch. And, that I feel like would be, a dream come true from when I was little. So that would be one thing I think that's at the top of my head. And then eventually when Broadway opens back up, one day I would love to do theater in some way. That would be also a dream come true.
Yeah. And as far as producing, do you have do you have a bug there as well? Is there a producing bug that's kind of like the acting bug?
No, my producing bug is just a selfish, like I realized that if I wanted to play certain roles, I was going to have to make it happen myself. So, that's more of I realized that I sort of have to do it. So that I'm not just waiting for other people to send me things or to call and offer me certain projects. I have to take more control of my career, and so that's come out of that. But I would like to get more comfortable with it and more and just better at it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for this great conversation. It was so much fun to really dig into the show because I really loved it as a viewer and a fan. So thanks for that.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it.
And on behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, we want to thank you for joining us today. And thank you for sharing your experience, process, your craft with your fellow performers. Thanks so much.
Thank you.